Please be seated. I will be, for the next several weeks, leading up to Resurrection Sabbath, Easter, whichever the name you want to use for it, the resurrection of our Savior. I'm going to be going through some books in Genesis. The book of Genesis. I'm going to be going through the book of Genesis and talk with you about what led up to the Passover and what the Passover means to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and in effect what that means to us. And believe it or not, there's even a piece in there that deals with leadership. So guess when that one's going to be? On the 24th. I am going to read the 19 verses in Genesis because I want them to be in your mind. I want you to be thinking about them as I'm going through this. I may not touch exactly on the verses themselves, but this whole talk period, the desire of the heart, is based this week on Abram and Joseph and us. Yep, Abram, Joseph, and us. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abram, and he said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you. So Abram rose up early in the morning and saddled his donkey and two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abram raised his hand and saw the place from a distance. And Abram said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will worship and return to you. And Abram took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took him in his hand the fire and the knife, so the two of them walked on together. And Isaac spoke to Abram, his father, and he said, my father? And he said, here I am, son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abram said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together. And Abram said, God will provide... I'm sorry, I went right back to the same verse. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abram built the altar there, and arranged the wood, and bound his son Isaac, and laid him on top of the wood. And Abram stretched out his hand, and he took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abram, Abram! And he said, here I am. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him, for I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abram raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abram went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. And Abram called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abram a second time from heaven, and he said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and you have withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you and greatly multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and as the sands as the sand which is on the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. And in your seed all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abram returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abram lived at Beersheba. Story number 1. Story number 2. There was a young man who worked hard all of his life. His father was not without means. The young man went through high school, a fairly decent high school career, graduated at the top of his class, went on to college, did exceedingly well in college, and as he and his father were going to graduation, the father asked the son what he was going to do now that he was graduating from college. And the son said, I am going to take that new sports car that you're going to give me for graduation, and I am going to go and do some traveling. Dad raised his eyebrows and said nothing. But after graduation, after they had gone through all of the ceremonies and returned to their home country, the dad called him into his office in the house, and he handed him a package that was obviously a bound book. The young man took the book, and he looked at it, and he threw it on the desk, and with some few choice words for his father and what he thought of his father and his father's love for him, etc., 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 walked out of the house and didn't come back. After several years, many years, and many life events, the young man, now probably middle-aged, received a phone call that his father had passed away. And although he hadn't talked to his father since graduation, he went home for the graduation service. And afterward, I'm sorry, that is a graduation service, but not the kind I meant. The funeral, he went into the office and he sat down behind his father's desk. And right there where he'd thrown that package many years ago, the package still sat there, still wrapped up. And so he unwrapped it. And he found a note. And the note and the Bible. And an envelope. And the note said that he hoped that this young man got the desire of his heart. And he opened the envelope, and there were the keys to the car. Sometimes we waste a lifetime because the desire of our heart did not come fast enough. And then there was a 17-year-old boy, story 3, and then I promise to be done with the stories. Now we're back to Scripture. All right. There was a 17-year-old boy who was the apple of his daddy's eye, and he got whatever he wanted, and he worked for his daddy's business, and when his brothers did something that he thought was bad, he ran to his daddy and told him immediately what his brothers had done. And he had a dream one day, and in this dream, he saw that he was going to be superior to his father and his brothers. And his brothers went and tattled on the young man. They weren't happy with that. So they plotted, and they found a way to make him disappear. When the chance came for them to sell him to a band of traveling pirates. Think about that for a while. That one ought to actually begin to have something turning in your head, okay? Think about that for a while. If you know the history of Abraham, you know that in the history of Abraham, the desire of Abraham's heart was to fulfill the promise that God had given him. Think about that for a minute. The desire of Abraham's heart was to fulfill the promise that God had given him. Because remember, God had told him many years before Isaac was born that he was going to be the father of nations. That his offspring were going to be more than there was in the sky, the stars in the sky. That he was going to be greater than anything else around. First, Abraham scoffed at God. I'm too old. My wife is too old. And you know I got to die sometime. So secondly, since God wasn't moving fast enough and he was old and decrepit, and I can talk about being decrepit. Not decrepit mind, but okay. He schemed to find a way to make his promises happen. And what did he do with his scheming? Let's see. He ruined Hagar's life because he and Sarah decided that since Sarah was too old to have children, and that wasn't going to happen, Abram would have a child with Hagar. Anybody in here, and I'm not just talking to the women, anybody in here, if your spouse was having an affair with somebody else, your best friend, whoever, was having an affair with somebody else, even if you said they could do it, that you wouldn't be a little bit upset. Just a little bit? Sarah was more than a little bit upset. She told him he had to get rid of her. Send her away. So Abraham did it. And he sent him away, and he sent Ishmael. Oh, yeah. Sent Ishmael away too. So he ruined Hagar's life. He ruined Ishmael's life. Think with me for a minute about the scripture that I read this morning. How would you feel if your father, whom you loved and adored and looked up to, without warning, got firewood and a knife and took you on a journey and built an altar? I've had a lot of young men that, you know, they're in their 40s now, but most of them tell me what it was like living with me. And although I was probably not the easiest person to live with, they liked what I had done at the time. But I don't think I could have gotten a single one of those young men tied up, bound up, and put on an altar. I don't think I could have done that. He ruined Isaac's life. Hagar, Ishmael, Isaac. Oh yeah. And if he ruined Ishmael's life because he ran him off, how many other lives came after Ishmael that he ruined their lives? Think about the fact that God said that Ishmael also would have more offspring than the sands on the sea and the stars in the sky. And that Ishmael and Isaac would not see eye to eye. And there would always be strife between them and amongst them. Think about that. In a way, in a very real way, you could say, Abram ruined our lives. And then there was this guy, Joseph. You remember him? Joseph, the son of Isaac? No. Son of Jacob? One generation off. The son of Jacob? Okay, remember him? This guy, Joseph, Genesis chapter 37 through chapter 50. There are a couple places where the story diverts a little bit, but pretty much his history is in 37 to 50. He was this big shot, bragging little brother who thought he was better than anybody else. And he bragged about his coat, and he bragged about his goat. I don't know about that one. Sounded like a good rhyme. But he bragged about a lot of stuff. Oh yeah. And he had this dream. Remember that dream? 17-year-old boy that I talked about, second story? Okay? He had a dream that he was going to be greater than his brothers, or than his mother and his daddy. And so they got rid of him. Joseph uses his charm to get a position of rank. You know, when I was in seminary, and yes, this does have to do with this. When I was in seminary, in one of our counseling classes, the professor told us that we should never, ever, ever go on a house call by ourselves. Never. And this was back in the 70s, so this was before some of the other issues that have come up. But he said, it doesn't matter if you're going to go see a man or a woman. Don't go by yourself. You're your own worst enemy if you do. Because you can be the strongest person in the world ethically and still get dragged down. Don't go by yourself. Back to Joseph. Joseph has this position in his master's house where he's running everything. And as the story goes, if you have heard this story, as the story goes, Joseph is there by himself. And the master's wife decides he's one darn good-looking young man. And she tries to get him to go off into her room with her. And he says, not doing it. And so he runs off, but she grabs his coat. Now, right now I'm working with cognitively disabled and autistic middle school students. And I really don't care if they're cognitively disabled or general ed. If you grab a middle school student's coat, what's that kid going to do? I will guarantee you he will be out of that coat in seconds before you can grab the other arm and pull it around. Well, that's what Joseph did. He was gone. but she had the coat. And she told her husband. Back to the original question. Wouldn't you be just a little bit angry? Joseph went through another imprisonment, and he got to the place where he interpreted another dream, and he gained control again. He gained control of the emperor's supplies in a time of drought. And he manipulated and manipulated until his family came, and when his family came, he manipulated his family and got them to move to Egypt. You can read the particulars. I'm skimming the top on purpose. You can read the particulars. Genesis 37 through 50. Okay? And Joseph ruined the Israelites' lives. How many years did they spend in Egypt? But they had this land promised to Abraham. What is the desire of the heart? We read some of these stories and we look at them and we think that we know the purpose, and there are other purposes in these stories, but what you need to look at is the desire of their heart God, or is the desire of their heart making their own way? Finding their own purpose. Making sure they ended up on top. See, because if Abraham had done what God told him to do, there's a good probability that it would have happened sooner. I'm guilty of that. I'm sure others in here are. You know, God makes us a promise, but we want to do it faster. When I was a senior in high school, I knew God had already told me that I was going to be a pastor. I did not want to spend 4 years in college and 3 years in seminary to become a pastor of an American Baptist church somewhere in Kansas. So I decided I was going to do it quicker. Most of you know, I know David knows, I spent 5 years in seminary. I didn't spend 3, I spent 5. I didn't get out of college in 3.5. If I had done what I was told to do, I'd have gotten out much quicker. I would not have had the problems to face in my life that I had to face. But the desire of my heart, although my desire is for God, I talk to God all the time. I'm sure a lot of you do too. You talk to God all the time, but you think you have a better plan. Abram thought he had a better plan. The young man who was given the Bible with the keys to the car thought he had a better plan. Joseph thought he had a better plan. And it cost him, it cost them, it cost us 3 times what it would have cost before. What is the desire of your heart? Listen to God, or listen to yourself. Let's close our service with number 496. He hideth my soul. Number 496 is our closing hymn.